Welcome to the Building Spirit-Filled Homes podcast by Red Mountain Community Church. This podcast exists to help us engage with a variety of topics through a biblical lens. It is our prayer that we'll take all that we learn from these conversations and apply them to our lives so that we can make a kingdom impact on those around us, starting in our home. Thanks for joining us for our conversation today. Well, welcome to the Red Mountain podcast on building spirit-filled homes. We're excited to have you join us today. There's going to be a tremendous amount of information where we're going to engage with various topics through a biblical lens. And so we invite you to join our conversations today with Laura Goodyear from Compassion Counseling. We're excited about having her today. And today we're going to talk about relationships with teens. So it's going to be a very exciting and fruitful conversation that we hope you'll join us for. So Laura, thanks for joining us today, and really appreciate, just the fact that you partner with us as a biblical counselor to help us care and guide and equip and challenge our people. And so we're excited about this Building Spirit-Filled Homes podcast and opportunity where we can share knowledge, our victories, our defeats, and how we can together walk with Jesus and use practical tools to help people find healing, find freedom, find steps forward, understanding, whatever that might be. And so today we've got a fun topic, which is understanding teens and relationships, which we've been through. We are no longer teens, and yet we've had teens and we've seen the hills and valleys of that. And so what are some things, not only as a certified counselor, but also as a mother, what have been some things that you've seen that could be helpful tools, practical things that could help the audience understand how to do that well? Is what we're looking for.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I think can be really helpful is talking to your kids about dating less as telling them what to do or not to do, and teaching them sort of how to think about dating and about relationships. And sometimes we miss that, particularly just as parents. I mean, we're anxious. We know that relationships are full of sort of as minefields for teens. And so in our anxiety, we can be like, make sure you don't do this or whatever, instead of really helping them sort of think through. And so I'm talking about even saying something like, hey, kiddo, what do you think is the purpose of dating?
Wow. I like that.
And have a conversation with your kid about what do they think is the purpose of dating. And you have to approach it as a parent, and this is where it requires tremendous self-control. It can't be, this is my chance to tell them what the purpose of dating is. Like you have to be sort of agenda-free. Because a teenager can sniff out an agenda.
All day.
I mean, anytime. And so it's got to just be this like, I want to have a meaningful conversation with my kid. I want to help them think about an important topic. This is not a one-time conversation.
Wow.
That's the other thing that we as parents tend to feel the pressure of, like, this is it. Yeah. We're talking about dating or sex or whatever. And then we feel all this pressure. We need to let the pressure go. This is going to be an ongoing conversation we're going to have with our kid for years.
Yeah.
And so, but just starting with like, what do you think is the purpose of dating? Is it, because that drives every decision you make after that.
Sure.
If you think the purpose of dating is to have fun and to hook up, that will drive how you approach relationships as a teen.
Right.
If you think dating is for the purpose of figuring out what you want in a spouse,
sure,
that will determine how you approach it. If you think dating is only for finding a spouse, that will determine how you approach dating, right? And so as parents, we probably have our own philosophy and our own approach of dating and how we want our kids to do it, but we cannot legislate this. We've got to sort of coach and be a wise guide and help them think about it. And so if we start that conversation and help them think about it, because they'll start, well, I guess it's to, find someone. Okay, find someone to marry. What does that look like? So starting there with just, hey, teen, what do you think is the purpose of dating, can actually be a great opening into the conversation. Let's not lead with, now remember, don't have sex before marriage.
Right, sure.
Because then it's just, oh, these are the rules.
Yeah, I love that idea of inviting them into a conversation where you're exploring kind of where they're at and what their understanding is,
Yep.
because otherwise we're front loading it with just information dump,
Yep.
and they've already closed off because
100%.
it's like you actually don't actually care about
Right.
what I'm trying to process through.
Right.
And I love the fact that you're saying it's an ongoing conversation. It's not just the one and done, like, hey, I went on this weird camping trip with my dad to have the talk.
Yes.
And the dad and kid come back and they're like, that was horrendous. And it's like,
Yes.
well, I
Check.
could have told you that was going to be horrendous, but it's like, hey, how are we engaging in those conversations? Hey, why do you want to date? Like,
Yeah.
what is the purpose of dating? Like, how do your friends see that? Right?
Yeah.
Does the Bible talk about dating? Maybe it doesn't specifically, but maybe it does talk about relationships.
Sure.
So like, how does that guide us? And so
Right.
I love that elongated understanding of it's a conversation that begins with questions
Yeah,
where
it
they give you
does.
feedback.
Yes, and I think that interest and that curiosity in their experience helps create safety,
Mm,
which is a huge piece of parenting teens, is creating safety in the relationship. You
mhm.
can come to me even if you crash my car, even after I told you
Sure.
not to drive it.
Yeah.
I want I, I want them to call me when
Right.
something goes wrong,
Yeah.
right? So I want to be a safe place to talk about relationships. I'm not going to be a safe place if I'm
Mm,
just the
just
the
the
rule
hammer.
maker.
Yeah.
If I'm the, here's what you do, here's what you don't do. So even with things like, how old should my kids be when they start dating? People ask me that a lot. Like, when do you think? When's the appropriate
Sure.
age? Have a conversation with your kids. What do you think is an appropriate age for dating? Now, that's not to say by asking your kids, you are abdicating
Right.
your role as a parent and you're not making any guidelines, boundaries, rules. No, but it's
Sure.
saying now this is this collaborative process.
Mm,
I can remember talking to my kids about it and being like, what do you think about what's an appropriate age for dating? Well, we first had talked about like, what's the purpose of dating? And then it became, I had boys. So then I was like, well, would it be appropriate to be dating before you have your driver's license and your mom drives you on the dates?
Right.
Well, right away, my boys were like, no,
Right.
I don't want my mom to.
Sure.
Okay, so now we've moved to you at least have your driver's license and car privileges. And
Sure.
like we just started sort of this deductive reasoning of like, what would be appropriate? What do you think would be a responsible way to engage this process to honor a young lady or a guy
Yeah.
and and still sort of explore what a relationship could look like. And so those types of questions we as parents get kind of hung up on of like, what should the rules be?
Mm,
What should the rules be? What rules should I be telling my kids? Is the questions that I hear a lot. And it's like, let's not worry so much about rules. Let's not worry so much even about age. There's nothing magical about turning 16
Right.
or 17 or 18. So let's make the markers a little bit different. Let's determine with our kids, okay, what other things do you need to be old enough for before you're old enough for dating? What
mm,
kind of things do you need to demonstrate that you're responsible enough to do?
Sure.
Everything in life kind of, we move along this sort of, okay, I'm not going to be the CEO of the company if I don't know how to do these,
Right.
basic roles or whatever. So it's the same thing of like, okay, kid, you want to enjoy the privilege and the responsibility of dating.
Yeah.
Demonstrate to me other areas of your life
Mm,
where you handle privileges and responsibilities well.
That's great.
And then let's talk about this one. Well, so then inevitably now we're backing up to like, you still haven't mowed the lawn that you said you would do 3 weeks ago, or
Sure.
you still haven't, like we've been talking about you cleaning your room or whatever. So now like the framework, the sort of the rubric for deciding about dating isn't about these rules or an arbitrary age. It's about sort of becoming a person who can handle this responsibility.
I like that. I like that idea of becoming and it not just being so legalistic in that.
Mhm.
I love that idea because I think that's what happens is out of fear we think, well, I want to do it right. I need to read all the right books and like just tell me the thing. Like
Yeah.
just tell me this, the third month of their 16th birthday is like
I
the sweet spot. And like you said, there isn't a sweet spot. It's really every kid is a little bit different, even within the same family. We've noticed with our 4 kids is they've all kind of arrived at that first step at a different time.
Yep.
And that's not
Yep.
wrong.
Nope.
It's just different. And it's
Yeah.
because they're unique and God's designed them differently. And so it gives us an opportunity to say, we asked the kind of that same thing, like, hey, how are you going to pay for popcorn at the movies and the movie ticket?
Yep.
Well, Dad, aren't you going to give me the money? I'm not dating them.
I'm not underwriting
Yeah.
this.
So it's like, oh, so I need money. Okay, well, how do you get money? Oh, is that going to happen at home? Are you going to do
Right.
chores around the
Right.
house? Are you going to get a job? Oh, I can't get a job till I'm this age. Okay,
Right.
well, then does dating make sense?
Right.
Until you can provide for yourself and somebody else. Oh, but I love
Yeah.
inviting them into that conversation, because then it's not you can't do or don't do. It's, oh, that doesn't make sense yet.
Right.
And
And then they're arriving
yeah.
at that kind of on their own. And don't we all thrive in decisions that we feel a sense of ownership
Sure.
over, as opposed to someone else deciding it for me, whether
Yeah.
that's a boss or whether that's a parent?
Right.
If someone who's leading me kind of helps me think through and then be like, that is the right decision, I should eat less sugar, and
Yeah.
then I'm like, I should eat less sugar, as opposed to just my doctor being
Right.
like, you should really eat less sugar. And then I'm like,
Sure.
I know I should. Let's
Yeah.
stop for Dairy Queen on our way home.
Right. Yeah.
But if that person has sort of guided me through thinking about the consequences and, then I'm suddenly going like, wow, I should really change. I should do this differently, whether it's a teen thinking about how they date or whether it's us thinking about our health.
Sure.
We've had a sense of ownership over the process, which changes everything.
Have you seen, just in your experiences, that the younger people tend to receive that better? I mean, where maybe there was a point of tension in a family and like, we can't just sort this out.
Mhm.
And was that like revealed where maybe that was the point of tension of rules over
Yeah.
engagement and conversation? Or
Mhm.
how did you come to kind of that understanding maybe?
Well, the language that I hear a lot from the teens, whether it was my own or whether it's my clients,
Sure.
is they don't trust me.
Uh,
They don't trust me. They don't trust me. And on the one hand, as parents, we're all thinking, your brain is not fully formed yet. Of course I don't trust you,
Sure.
right? There's an element of truth to that, of like, yes, I know more than you do about the ways that this could go wrong. I know some of your weaknesses better than you do, and so I don't trust you. And yet it's like the thing they crave the most for teens is like, I want. And so I think that word trust can be kind of loaded and create conflict for parents and teens, because they're like, well, I don't really trust you, and you didn't mow the lawn, or you did, but it's like, if we can shift that to making it less about trust and more about sort of believing in them. Like, your teen really wants to feel like you believe the best about them. And often, because we're afraid as parents, we're so nervous.
Sure.
And we do see their worst, let's face it. We
Sure.
all see each other's worst at home, right?
Yeah.
It's hard for us to believe the best about our teens because our fear gets in the way and we just see all the ways that things could go wrong.
Sure.
But the thing they crave the most typically is, I just want my parents to give me the benefit of the doubt, believe the best about me, trust me to some extent. So that's where we just start nuancing this as parents. You don't trust them with, whatever, your sports car the day they
Sure.
turn 16 at 9 o'clock at night with all their friends in the car.
Sure.
Like, that's just, okay, we're not gonna.
Yeah.
But can I demonstrate some trust in them and give them some leeway? And then when they rise to the occasion, mark that, praise that, and then give them more responsibility. If they don't rise to the occasion, if you give them that little bit of trust and they let you down, then don't resist the urge to bring the hammer down.
Sure.
Because again, that's what we do in our fear and our frustration, right? We as parents, if there was ever a catastrophizer, the best catastrophizers are parents, right? We go from like, my kid was out late to they're probably going to have a drug problem and they're never going to, whatever. And so as soon as they don't rise to the occasion, we tend to that's it. I knew I couldn't trust you, blah, blah, blah. And like really, really bring the hammer down. That's not to say there shouldn't be consequences.
Sure.
Of course there should be consequences for their decisions, their actions, whatever. But if we can just sort of nuance that a little bit and be like, okay, let's talk about that. I gave you that little bit of leeway. It didn't go great. You know, let's talk about, I mean, even I always loved asking my kids, well, if you were me, how do you think you would parent in this moment?
That's good.
Because all they can think about is the injustice for them of being a teen and how misunderstood they are and all of this, right?
And avoiding consequences.
And avoiding consequences, right? And feeling very justified in it, which of course we as adults do with God all the time, right? You know, we can relate to that. And so asking them like, boy, I'm really in a pickle here because I really would love to trust you. I'd love to see you soar with this additional responsibility. You know, I'd love to see you be able to have a girlfriend, but you came home later than you said you would. And that broke our trust and tells us maybe you're not ready for that. But like, what would you do if you were me? Now, their first instinct is going to be, give me a second chance.
Right, yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about that. What would that second chance look like? Would there be consequences? What if you didn't live up to the second chance? What do you think, like if you had a kid, you know, inevitably, if you've created a culture of conversation
I like that.
with your teens, you know, they'll probably begrudgingly get to at least start thinking about, okay, I'm still going to try and like twist this to my advantage and minimize my consequences. But I realize like my parents aren't being unreasonable.
Sure.
Right. And that's what we're really trying to just help keep those, I don't know, those bridges between us still.
I love that
intact.
idea of a culture of conversation. I mean, it seems like that's a good word. That's a good practical tool to take away is, am I developing, right? And this isn't something where you flip on a light switch, hey, now we have this culture of conversation, right? It's something that's developed over time. And I love how even the idea of trust, right? Even as we're trusting the Lord, even as we're developing our children to understand trust, it's steps, right? And we don't start with the big thing, right? We start with smaller things that they can grow and learn where we can practice grace and understanding. And I love that. Hey, okay, we tried that. How did that go? You know, and again, and that was one of the things that my wife and I have done with our kids in consequences is kind of what you said. Well, what's an appropriate consequence, right? For something like this? Like, what do you think is actually fair? Because what we do as parents is we freak out, well, you've lost all privileges. And now basically all I've done is punish myself. Actually,
I'm driving them everywhere.
So it's like, why am I losing here? And I think, and part of that is because if you develop a culture of conversation, you can have those conversations. And also it's probably one of those things of knowing when to have the conversation. Is that something that you've seen people pick? Like, is the timing of like creating a culture, I think, is key, but it's also probably reading the room and knowing when to have that conversation. Is that important?
Sometimes it depends. I would say, you know, people talk a lot about quality time. You know, quality time as, you know, spouses or quality time with our kids. Here's my approach to quality time. If you focus on quantity, the quality will come. Don't worry about trying to manufacture quality time with our kids. I think some of that has become this sort of, you know, reaction to our world becoming so busy, our kids' lives becoming so busy. We feel like our touch points with our kids are so minimal that we're like, all we have is this 30 minutes in the car and I got to make this quality time. And it puts a lot of pressure on you. Thereby, creating pressure in the whole conversation. So if you could just focus on quantity, the quality will come. It will sneak up on you. If you've, you know, I would plan my day around being in the kitchen when I knew my kids would be in the kitchen, which I had boys, so that was a lot. But because they were always eating.
Because they're hungry. You know? They're boys.
But, you know, even when it was like, okay, I know that he has to go to work early and like, I'm gonna just position myself in the kitchen and playing Wordle, and when he's out there, and then a conversation might happen.
Sure.
And I might try and make a conversation happen. What's your day looking like? How are things going? What about that test? But just make yourself available. The more quantity time, the quality time will come. And so I do think, though, with regard to sort of choosing the timing, one of the things I've learned, again, the hard way, this was feedback from my own kids, was I think I made the mistake of hoping that if I'm just available and I wait for them to come to me with a question, then I will, grace them with my wisdom in the moment. And the feedback was, I wish you would have just brought it up. I wish you would have just, even if I would have said, even if I would have shut you down, because boys are notoriously kind of closed-mouthed about things and yeah, nothing, fine. They answer in grunts, I'm like, is this an unhappy grunt? Is this a hungry grunt? I'm trying to read the room here. Yeah. But, I wish I would have sort of brought things up a little more and been like, how's the homecoming is coming up or prom's coming up, and have you thought about that? I would avoid it because I knew they don't want to talk about it with me. I'll wait until they want to talk about it with me, but I should have just asked, and then even if they shot me down, I've at least put out there I'm willing to talk about that thing.
Okay.
And I'm interested in it, and I'm not going to pressure you. So if I say, hey, have you thought about taking somebody to prom? And they're like, no. And I don't go, well, why not? Well, what about her? Blah, 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 and push and push and push. I respect the boundary. They're clearly not interested in talking about it. But what have I done? I've hopefully planted a seed. Hey, sure. I'm a safe person to talk to about this. I'm interested in it.
Yeah, you're showing interest.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's so key. What you're saying is, one is showing interest, because they want to know, right? Yep. They'll give us what they want to give us. But if we don't engage and show interest, they're not going to think we care. Right. To just being present. I think that's a huge piece of it is, am I present? Am I, taking my kids to the things, being in the car with their friends, listening to conversations? Am I available? Yep. I was talking with another dad this week about saying how as our kids get older, their conversation time is like 10:30 and later.
Ooh,
like when I want to be asleep. And it's this idea of like, we could have had this at 5:30, but they're not ready to have that conversation. Yep. When they're ready to have it, are we available and are we engaging? And I think that's what you're saying is so important. Oh, and along the lines, what you were saying earlier about the affirmation. Like when our kids, how are we affirming them? Are we only, affirming them when they do these certain things, but affirming them in the process? Like, hey, thanks for coming to me with this, man. I can see you growing in this, and how vital those moments of affirmation are. But again, we got to be present. We got to be intentional.
You're not going to know unless you're there. Absolutely. what to give them that feedback on, and they're going to see right through some sort of fake, again, agenda.
Sure.
Right? It has to be just part of your lived experience with them. But yeah, the affirmation, I cannot stress enough. And I think even to back up the bus, whether we're talking about talking to our kids about dating or any other thing, before I can approach those conversations with wisdom, I've got to do my own work.
Amen.
As a parent, I've got to reckon with my own fears. Because I think of it in terms of like, I'm not going to banish all my fears about my kids as teens, right? I mean, it's just, but like, is my fear in the driver's seat, or is it at least just riding shotgun, as I'm having this conversation? And so if I feel really, really anxious about how my kids are turning out, about the decisions they're making, I am not going to be able to approach this conversation with genuine curiosity. And I'm not going to give this vibe, there's literally just kind of an energy that comes off of us when we're anxious. I'm not going to be able to give off this vibe of being safe and curious. And so if we back up the bus, even when we're talking to our teens about relationships, the first step before you even talk about your kids is sort of reckoning with your own stuff of like, what are my fears? How do my fears get there? Maybe my fears got there because I had some pretty traumatizing experiences when I was younger. and it really freaked me out. I don't want my kids to have that same experience. Or maybe it wasn't even trauma, but it was like I had my heart broken, and I don't want my kids heartbroken. And so, and often our fears are 99% of the time, our fears are centered around our kids getting hurt.
Sure.
But all our kids hear is, I fear that you can't make good decisions. And what they don't understand is what's underneath that is like, I'm just so afraid that you'll get hurt. And so if we can do some of our own work, I mean, yes, therapy, I'm a fan, but it doesn't have to be therapeutically. Like, spend some time with God in the scriptures with your journal of like, go for a walk and pray and just, Lord, I can tell I'm really freaked out about this. Help me trust you with this. Give me wisdom. It's really hard to access wisdom when we're mildly hysterical.
Sure. Yeah.
So step one, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Let me spend some time with the Lord, reorienting myself to his sovereignty and his kindness, and his ability to give me wisdom in this so that it will calm me down and help me to approach this.
Yeah. And he says, ask and I'll give it to you abundantly. And I love that idea of, in that moment of kind of like unrest, like you have to, that's the best time to seek the Lord. Go for a walk, right? Change your geographical location. Go talk to him. Go to a place that's a little bit calming and seek him because he's with you and he longs to bring that peace that surpasses understanding, and just say, hey, remember when you went through that? I was with you.
Yes.
And guess what? And you made it through it. And so don't you think I love your child as much as I loved you? Of course I do. And so I think that's the wonderful part of the gospel that we have to be reminded of amidst all of the practical steps is, man, have you gone to the Lord with your own fear first? Right? And,
absolutely.
And why would we not think the Lord loves our children? A million times more than we can even understand. And so, and yet, even if they do something that's a little bit ornery, it doesn't change his love for them, right? I mean, we see that throughout the gospel. I mean, one of my favorite examples is, when Peter denies Jesus, right? Jesus meets him where he is with love, compassion. He doesn't make a rooster sound, which I would have done in my orneriness, right? What does he do? He restores him. Right. And not only does he restore him, but he gives him a greater purpose. And those are those things I think as parents, as we can forget those things in the heightened emotive state, where we really need to step back and seek the Lord's wisdom in that and trust that he'll actually provide it for us and care for our kids no matter what the outcome is.
Yes. And the Lord's primary sanctification tool is pain.
Sure. I would agree.
Right?
Unfortunately, pain and suffering.
Yes, that's how we learn, right? That's how we grow. And so there's no version of your kids becoming Christ-like without your kids suffering on some level. I mean, of course, we want to minimize that suffering. We don't want them to suffer due to foolishness. Because there's enough sin and fallenness in the world that the suffering will come, as it is. So I don't want to just be like, whatever, and let them suffer from their own foolishness. But I think as parents, understanding and at least accepting that there is no version of my kids becoming Christ-like without my kids experiencing suffering. There's going to be hard things.
And that's hard, right? Really, that's as a kid, you're oblivious to that reality, right? Right. Because we're invincible. But when you become a parent, I was talking to another dad last night just about how you don't understand just the immensity of God's love until you become a parent. And then it's like, oh my gosh, like I would give my life for this kid in their worst.
Absolutely.
Which is when you read those passages, like Jesus died for us while we were sinners, it takes on a whole different weight when you're a parent and you're like, man, I get that. Yeah. That makes sense because I want the best for them. I don't want them to experience. And yet we have to trust the Lord with our child in suffering, in pain, knowing that he can guide, care, restore, all of those things, right? What 1 Peter 5:7 talks about, or through 10, as you've suffered for a little while, right? For us, little while can feel like an eternity. For God, it's like a blip.
Right.
And yet that's the most transformative, sanctifying moment that we all, if we look back at our lives, man, that's when I really learned to trust the Lord. That's really when he really transformed my heart and my mind and my choices. And I couldn't have learned it any other way. But as a parent, it's like, could we go through this differently? And yet that's again where we have to trust the Lord. Hey.
We got to do our own work.
So as we could probably talk forever on this, which is exciting and I love, and we're going to continue to do more of these. But what are a couple of just takeaways you think that we could just leave the audience with, that just some hot points that from our conversation that you think just as they've been listening to take away that they can maybe engage in their family or their communication culture or culture of communication. I like how you said that.
Yes, I think that's a great takeaway right there. I think, managing and, just dealing with our own baggage and our own fears and our own, emotions before we try and parent with wisdom is a huge piece. But I think also with that culture of conversation is this specifically about sort of, using this approach that's very collaborative with your teens about figuring out how they want to approach dating or any number of relationship issues in their life, where instead of, it's just so easy for us because we are older and wiser and we have lived this experience. It's easy for us to sort of come in as the expert. I know what I'm talking about. It's time for you to sit down and listen to me. I know you and I know what it's like to be a teen. And as soon as that version of us shows up in the conversation, they start shutting down. But if a version of us shows up in the conversation that says, hey, I may have known you since you were born, or if they were adopted since you were whatever age, but you know you better than I do. And so help me understand you and what it's like to be you and what your thoughts are about dating, or about relationships or the opposite sex or sex in itself. So if you can just really approach that culture of conversation with an air of curiosity and a willingness to sort of abdicate your status as expert and approach as sort of a collaborator, let me help collaborate with you on figuring out how you can make decisions with wisdom and build a life that you love. Most kids aren't too mad about that. Mom and dad are on my side. They want me to avoid getting hurt and succeed in life. And they've demonstrated that they're interested in these conversations, even when all I do is grunt or avoid or whatever. It'll go a long way. But parenting is a long game. And parenting teens, sometimes it takes a long time before those seeds sprout into anything. And so just trusting the Lord with the seeds that you plant is a big piece of it.
I like that's a good word to end on. Trusting the Lord with the seeds that you plant through a culture of conversation. That's the tweetable moment.
There you go. So, thank you. I tweeted.
Somebody will tweet it for us. But thank you, Laura, for taking this time. I really appreciate you and the work that you're doing for the kingdom and just your heart for people and the Lord. And so thanks for your wisdom that you shared today and the conversation. I look forward to more conversations with you. And if you haven't had an opportunity to get to know Laura, I would check out Compassion Counseling. She's one of our biblical counselors, and we're excited to continue to partner with her in caring for people and building the kingdom. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.